Hello, and welcome to another CS631 Advanced Programming in the Unix Environment tooltip. Well, this time it's not so much an actual tooltip, as it's a general reminder that the NetBSD operating system, as a genetic Unix, comes with a number of historical Unix research papers and supplementary documentation, much of which are still entirely applicable today, nearly 40 years after they were first published. The documentation is installed into user shared doc, where you can find several directories. There's a directory for published papers, a directory containing programmer supplementary documentation, BSD, a few reference documents, a directory for the system manager manuals, SMM, and one for user supplementary documents, USD. Let's take a look at what we find in there. Here's a paper on the fast file system by Marshall Kirk McKusick from 1984. But what's with the display? Well, turns out the documentation here is actually formatted using the system typesetting tools. So let's use a pager that can properly display this. We'll use more. There, that's better. So here's a full paper on FFS, the default file system we've been discussing. These papers are well formatted and easy to read on the NetBSD system without the need for a Windows system or using Google or asking Quora. What a concept. You should find that many, if not most, of the names on the authors are familiar. Over here, there's a paper on password security by one Ken Thompson and Robert Morris Sr., who later would go on to become chief scientist at the NSA, and whose son, Robert Tappan Morris, later released the infamous Morris worm, the first computer worm on the internet. There is an introduction to the Unix shell by Stephen R. Bourne, author of, yes, the Bourne shell, covering all of the useful features of the shell. Including input-output redirection, pipelines and filters, all the good stuff. There's a VI/X reference manual. And here we also find the seminal BSD IPC Tutorials, discussing much of what we've covered so far and will cover in our next video. These two documents are also available from our course website in PDF form, by the way. Pipes should look familiar to you by now. And the advanced IPC tutorial covers socket pairs and sockets, topics of our next video. Then there's the Berkeley Software Architecture Manual, describing all the system calls and the overall architecture of the kernel. In the user supplementary documentation directory, we find a Unix for Beginners guide by Brian Kernighan. And another VI quick reference. Answering the supposedly difficult question of how to exit VI, as well as how to maneuver it, operate it, and generally be more efficient using it. As well as a more detailed tutorial by the guy who wrote VI, Bill Joy. All of these docs are found under user share doc, but since we have the source for the OS, we can also find out where they all come from. Indeed, the README here documents all the various locations and gives you an idea of what other documentation is available, but also noting that some of the historical documents are missing. So why don't you go ahead and explore this directory a bit more yourself. There's plenty of useful information in here that you should find especially applicable for our class. As we discussed in our introductory class, Unix was initially primarily used exactly for typesetting software manuals, so it shouldn't surprise us that the documentation uses all the tools present on the Unix systems. In particular, the ROF tools, a Unix version of the original Multics runoff text formatting tools. You can view the markup files and then convert it into formatted documents using the commands shown here. Alright, that's it for today. Hope you take the time to browse the docs, and you'll find a lot more of what we talk about in our next videos to be familiar from these IPC tutorials. Until next time, thanks for watching.